I'll just echo that. This is a workshop format, so we're going to keep it really informal, very casual. If you have questions, throw your hand up. If you need me to go back, we want to get your input, and these are really meant to be tools for you to take home and immediately put in use. So with that, we'll get started. So they asked me to talk about care binders today. Evidently, I heard that they kind of had to cycle through a few asks because not a lot of folks have these in place, so I was happy to do it. Care binders, medical notebooks, there's a lot of different things you can call this tool. They are organizing tools for caregivers of people living with unique, special, or complex needs. When you Google those terms online, it can very quickly turn into a rabbit hole. There are lots and lots of websites and articles and even YouTube videos telling you how to put together medical notebooks or care binders. People have even started their own businesses where you can sign up with them and they will work with you to put together something really specifically formatted for you if that's not your forte. A lot of hospitals will offer printable materials that you can take home with you. Templates, so to speak, that you can fill out on your own. I always find that what's up online is usually overly simple and a little bit generic for the complexities that come along with Dravet syndrome or any type of epilepsy syndrome. And it's really frustrating to me when I look through these packages when they want you to fill out a whole form with all of your insurance card information. I don't know about any of their moms here. I have my insurance card memorized. I can tell you our member ID and our group number because we say it over and over. I don't need it taking up a page in my care book. I don't want to write down my address and phone number. Those are really things for maybe someone that has a simpler condition that they're treating. I really need more. I need formatted pages that get into the nitty-gritty of what I'm dealing with at home. So what I'm going to do is kind of take you through how I developed my book, and then I'm going to give you a couple of samples of custom pages that I have developed, along with a few pages that I found online that I think would be helpful for you guys. So with that, 1 second. Okay, so again, I'm Kate Hintz. I'm mom to Morgan. This is my 11-year-old at home. I'm currently serving as the president of the board of directors for the foundation. My professional background is in wedding gown production, logistics, and sales. I have no medical training, and I don't have any necessarily professional experience in relationship to care binders, so I'm not here to give you any specific medical advice. I am a self-professed organizational enthusiast. I really love organizing, so care binders are like right up my alley. For us in our house, I think is the case for a lot of these families, the early months were a complete blur. And what happened was the records and the paperwork just started to pile up and up and up. And if I happened to have a day off or I had someone in my house caring for my daughter, I could stop and start to go through that paperwork and try to get organized. What would happen was she was seizing so much, we were constantly adding medications, titrating them up and down almost weekly, then weaning them when they didn't seem to work. And how do you keep that information straight? It's really hard. If there's 2 caregivers in the house and you're changing the medication dosing like on an hourly basis, it's hard to keep that information straight. So in the early months, we pretty much had no system in place. The other thing is we would go, she would have seizures, we'd get admitted to the hospital. They would hand you these really generic forms once they hooked up to EEG, so you had to write down when the seizure was, what time it was, what it looked like. I guess I really expected that in a hospital setting, like the professionals would be taking the notes and the professionals would be, logging all this important stuff down. They don't do that. You are responsible for logging all of the information that they're gonna ask you about later. So it took a couple of hospital visits for me to realize that I was the one responsible for making sure that they had the accurate information. I also would find mistakes on the hospital discharge papers, and that was really frustrating, and as a young mom, it was also really upsetting. I remember I came home once, and the whole stay had been such a blur, and I saw on the discharge papers that they had put down a diagnosis of dwarfism. And it was so random, and it really frustrated me that I hadn't caught it, and said, like, what is this? Why is, it just had nothing to do with the reason we were in the hospital, and I felt like I should have caught it when I read through those papers and signed them, but I didn't. So it's a lot of stress to keep accurate records. That's my point. If you have a system in place that is yours and formatted the way you like it, you don't need those papers. That's the point of that. So I started writing everything down myself. So in general, a care binder is an organizing tool with relevant documents pertaining to the care of your loved one. A care binder should contain edited content. It is not a catch-all for every single piece of paper that you get back regarding a doctor's visit or a test or lab work. It can contain formatted templates or completely custom pages. It should contain a complete overview of care for a 24-hour period pertaining to your loved one. And I would really suggest that you use language appropriate for a friend, a neighbor. Don't use language that only a doctor or a neurologist is going to understand. You want to make sure that if you're not around and someone needs to open that book and fill in for you for an hour or two, that they can read the language there. So a lot of what you might read online, if you're reading about care binders, is that it has to be for a primary caregiver in the primary household, and that's the only use for this book. I'm going to venture a little further out there and say that that care notebook can be whatever you want it to be. If it needs to be, if you're preparing a book for a secondary house, if your partner or spouse lives in a different location, you want to make a book for them, that's great. It can be a book that is specifically for your babysitter or your respite provider that comes into the house. You can also make a book specifically if you guys are headed to the ER. You have it by the front door, you grab it, on your way out the door. Also, pre-scheduled appointments for the doctor, EEGs. You can have a book for the school or daycare. And finally, also a nursing book. These are all really relevant applications of a care binder. The notation for nursing is that RN and LPN providers will have specific charting needs, so you might have to get pages from them to put into your book rather than making the pages yourself, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. The point of this, when I say it contains edited content, you need to think about who's going to be reading this book and what do they need to know. If you're sending a book to school, you do not need to put your EEG report in that book. There's no reason that they would need to see that. And vice versa, the babysitter might not need to know, the daycare schedule. Well, that's probably not relevant for a babysitter. It would be, but you understand what I mean? All of these sections, you can just tweak exactly what you think that person needs to see. The simpler and more concise that book, the more effective that it's going to be. So what should be included? I think this is the area where a lot of us, our eyes glaze over because this is kind of where the work starts to happen. I've put together 2 lists. These lists are on a worksheet that you guys are going to get a little later today, so you don't have to write them down or worry about remembering them. These are just a few examples of information that I think is really important. I've divided it into sort of 2 different areas. This list is really made for you to pick and choose what you think you would need in your care binder. So first step being, who's using the care binder? This is the second step. What does that person need to see? You may only pick 2 or 3 things off of these lists that are relevant to you and your situation, or you may be like, we need all of that in our book. All of those things are really important. we might have things up here also that, are missing, something that's really important to you in your day-to-day. So again, it's not a complete list, it's sort of just a suggestion list or like a jumping off point. Again, there are many sources for pre-formatted care binders online. Cook's Children's actually has a great one on their website that's also included in the paperwork that you're going to get a little bit later. So you can always check with your hospital if they already have something that you could use to get started, along with your pediatrician's office or perhaps the group that your pediatrician is a part of. We'll often have support templates or booklets that you can use. If you have a good DOH in your state, sometimes they have pages online, Office for Developmental Disabilities, and then advocacy and support groups also will have templates online. So these are pictures of my care binder at home. Our care binder is also our nursing book because we have nurses that come into the house to help with care for our daughter. So it's just sort of like a big, blue, messy book. Well, I don't want to say it's messy, but it looks kind of messy in these pictures. Most of the pages in my book, I've made custom templates for myself based on what those nurses need to log and track, and what I need then to take back to the physicians. So I'm going to start with an example of kind of two extremes. So this is out of the Cook's Children's template that's online. This is just a really simple Word document for diet and nutrition. Normal eating time, foods to avoid, food allergies, special feeding instructions. This is a great page that you could give to a grandparent or to a babysitter, and it's also appropriate for a child that maybe doesn't have anything too specific going on in terms of their nutritional needs. So this is the feeding chart. She has a G-tube. Right now she's getting all of her nutrition through her G-tube. And so I need to be really, really specific with the caregivers when she's getting what and how much. So this is an Excel chart. All of the feedings are in blue. All of the medications are in yellow. And then the water is with no color. It's in order, chronological order throughout the day. As you can see, she gets a lot of stuff the whole day, basically. But it's simple, it's easy to read. I feel like even if you were not a nurse with no medical training, this gives you kind of a good idea of what she needs to get and when. So this is the other end of the spectrum, maybe a child that has a G-tube or has specific nutritional needs. Again, one end of the spectrum, this is just a very simple grid layout from Cook's Children's. This says surgeries or procedures. This could be a great format to log seizures. You write the time of the seizure, what kind of seizure it was, what interventions were taken, were there any additional medications given. I would also use this format for just any type of chronological timeline having to do with your child, so it doesn't have to be just surgeries or procedures. So the first one we have January 1st, there was a Metaport placed. Maybe January 15th, 104 fever, ER visit. February 1st, routine check-in with the gastroenterologist. This is a great place to give a really quick, concise snapshot that doesn't go into too much detail, but it helps you remember where you were and what you were doing. You can also hand this to your pediatrician when you go into the pediatrician and they're like, hey, what's been going on? You have everything already written down here. You don't have to rack your brain trying to remember everything that you were doing for the last 3 or 4 months. Yes. Okay. So I think that's a decision between you and your neurologist. I mean, really, it's a personal decision. Your neurologist may not ask that question. I do keep track of her seizures. What I do is I plug that into a monthly calendar and I keep an annual total. I'm not sure if I can pull it up for you or not, but that's how we study the trending in terms of my daughter's seizure control, month to month and then annually. Excel. I use Excel. There are seizure tracking apps, and we're going to talk about those specifically later. But you have to decide personally, like, what are the parameters that you're measuring how well your child is doing, and then, pick a format that works well for tracking that. So we're going to switch to the other side of the spectrum. So this is an INRS scale. I can't remember who gave this to me. It might have been the pediatrician. This is a pain scale for children who are nonverbal with intellectual disability. So the background with this, my daughter developed colitis when she was about 3 to 4 years old, and she's nonverbal. She was in a lot of pain, and we had no idea what was going on. And I really had a hard time during those years talking to my doctors and convincing them that something was seriously wrong. So I found this and I wrote down these really sort of, they might seem abstract to some people, but for folks with nonverbal children, this makes a lot of sense, right? If my daughter's hitting her head, she's got a headache, something's bothering her, this means I'm not feeling well. If she's arching her back like a little infant is and rigid, that means she's in a lot of pain. So I would use this scale. It helped me having conversations with the doctors to express how she was doing. And then on a day-to-day basis, it helped me just sort of gauge how she was doing in general. There are a lot of things like this online. You have to find what works for you and what you need to measure, and then plug in your data. I think something like this would be really pertinent for Dravet patients, talking about seizure triggers, right? Like, all of us have our individual things that we try to avoid because we know that they're gonna set our kids off. So if it's photosensitivity or the temperature, the hot baths. So you could use a format like this to start listing out what those triggers are, with the end result being like, they're gonna have a seizure. Yes? No, that was specific to our situation and what was going on. So she was very young at that point. Between, dealing with reflux, she got a lot of UTIs, and then we had the colitis. So those were sort of the three measures of, we know that those things cause children pain, but we don't know necessarily what the cause is. So it just sort of helped us connect the dots. But like I said, you could change that out for like myoclonics, focals, grand mals. Like, I know if my child stares at water reflecting on a pool, they're gonna start having myos, or fevers for grand mals, things like that. Attaching the symptom to the seizure type, it could be helpful. I feel like it might be helpful. This is a medication administration record. There's nothing that's going to violate HIPAA on here. I just left it in there, what we're giving, but there's no personal identifying information on there. So I developed this based off of a nursing MAR, like, one that you would have in a hospital. So my husband or I or the nurse, whoever is the person giving the medications, can initial or check off, to make sure that she's received everything that she needs to get at that specific time of day. I mean, all of us have been there, that we like, did I give the antibiotic? I can't remember. Our brains are so fried. Did I give the right, did I forget to give the probiotic? This is a great tool. We keep it right by where we keep the medication, and we can see that she's had her medications for the day. So this is the template I'm most proud of. I was sitting over here the other night, and I told a neurologist that I was giving this talk on care binders, and she looked at me with kind of these wide eyes, and she said, I really hope you're going to discourage families from coming in with these giant books that I'm supposed to read through at our appointments. And I said, don't worry, I am. Taking an overstuffed binder to a 15-minute appointment with your specialist, maybe you're lucky and you get like 25 minutes, but if you expect that they're gonna read through all of that material and then also have time to talk with you and assess your child, we know that's not how it works. So I managed to fit a lot of pertinent information onto this chart, and it's one page, it's Excel format. I have it loaded in the cloud on my phone, so if I forget to print it, I can show it on my phone. So I have, I don't have my pointer up. So on the top of the chart is all her current medications, the total daily dose for that medication, the times she gets it, any pertinent notes, what is the medication treating, and who is the prescribing doctor. Underneath that, I have supplements. Underneath that, I have rescue meds. Underneath that, I have diet. On the lower left corner, a list of all of her specialists and their contact phone number, the hospital affiliation. On the right side of the page are the diagnoses, all of the equipment we have in the home, all of the resolved diagnoses. This is one page, it's a snapshot, and the doctors love it. It takes them 1 minute to read it over. Not only can I take this to a doctor's appointment, I take this to the dentist when we go see her dentist. I take it to when we have visits with our Medicaid coordinator, I can show her this. It has a lot of uses. I have a copy printed and put in the glove box in my car so that if we're in a car accident, all of her medical information, at least the snapshot, is with us. It's a really great tool, and I urge you, this is mine and I developed it, you don't have to use it, but the point is that you're putting only the pertinent, edited information in a clear, concise format. This is a tool that's going to be a lot of use for families, and your doctors will love you, I promise. So what not to include in your books? This is really going to vary from family to family. I urge you, there's no reason to put bills into these books. Like I said, they should pertain only to the care of the individual. Unless you had a specific issue, for example, if your doctor ordered a test that insurance refused to pay for, maybe you want to show him the bill. I mean, that might be a very random example, but really there's no need to put bills of any kind into your care binder. Again, with the insurance information, the same, the EOBs. EOBs get lengthy, they're wordy, they're going to take up a lot of space. I don't really think there's any reason to put EOBs in there. Hospital discharge papers, as I said, unfortunately, they oftentimes contain errors. They're like 20 pages long, and there's a lot of information in there that is just really not needed. And then again, with school-related documents, unless you're making a book specifically for school, or maybe you want to keep a copy of your IEP in there to make sure they're getting those therapies throughout the day, but generally that stuff can be kept out of the care binder. Yes? So I do keep the paper copies. If I don't feel like I need immediate access to them, so anything older than like 2 years, they go into these banker's boxes, and I do keep them. I think the reason that I do that is because we do have both private insurance plus a state Medicaid waiver, and sometimes the waivers, you have to go back and provide information. So I just like to keep everything. I'm also required by law to keep nursing records for a certain amount of time, so I just don't like throwing anything away. And I'll have to say, so Morgan's 11, I probably only have 3 banker's boxes full of papers, and she's pretty medically complex, so it's not too bad. It doesn't take up a whole lot of space. I kind of store them under my desk, but I do tend to hold on to things, yes. So this is just another reminder from my conversation with that doctor. You want to make sure that the information in your book is clear, concise. You have, let someone double check it, make sure those medication doses are accurate, make sure the dates are accurate. It's helpful if the pages can be chronological. You want to make sure that you have the latest updated information in there. If you have a book and it hasn't been updated for 9 months, it's not necessarily going to be very helpful to you or whoever's using it. And the simpler, the better. Equally deserving of their own dedicated binders. This is kind of going back to that. Bills, insurance, Medicaid, school, all the clinical records. I have a book for lab work and EEG. I have all the copies of the discs in one of those discs holders in a separate binder. That's not a part of day-to-day care, and you don't need to take up space in a care binder with it. So, there are some resources and some advantages to going digital. There are websites and apps specifically developed for, with a care binder format. The pros, it's usually really easy to update those pages. Sometimes you can do it right from your phone. There's pre-formatted templates. Some have features where you can send the pages directly to your physician, like if you are logging seizures. Cons is that a lot of these websites and apps do not have clear privacy rules. We have a lot of concerns as a foundation about data sharing, and we can't always get clear answers on those, so just something to think about. Other than physicians, sometimes it's hard to share that data or have an alternate login. Like if you want your babysitter to be able to log into your account to look at the medication schedule, that can get tricky. And then again, a lot of these apps, they don't have custom options. So when you think about kids with Dravet who are often on multiple medications, you might have an app that only has room for 3, and maybe you have 6. So, you can't customize them. When Morgan was younger, so 2010 to 2012, there was this big push to put all of your information on a USB drive, and how great USB drives were to keep in your purse or your pocket, and that way if you ended up in the hospital, you could produce the USB drive for the ER staff. Never once did the ER staff want that USB drive. They either told me they weren't allowed to upload information into their system because of viruses. They were too cramped for time to actually, plug it in and then look through the pages. I never understood why people thought this was a great idea. I did try it with a couple of my, little templates there, and it never really worked. I don't know if anyone else has had luck loading their stuff on a USB drive. And plus now we have the cloud, so really you don't have to put things on a drive when if you wanted to, you could use Drive or the cloud or something like that. So we share one resource with you that is online. We actually just got this email this week. Veronica shared this with me. It's from the Rare Epilepsy Network. And the name of the website is called Mijo. I'm not sure. In Spanish, right? Okay, so we're not really sure how to pronounce it. Anyway, so this was developed by a parent of a child that has a complex, a rare syndrome. I can't think of the one off the top of my head. It looks pretty good. I couldn't get to the templates without creating an account, and I didn't have time to do that before I put this together. But I would urge you guys to check it out. It's free. They do address a lot of those things that I mentioned in the previous slide, they have templates specifically for a grandparent, for a babysitter, for a respite provider. So I was encouraged by what I saw. And just because I don't like being digital doesn't mean that you're not going to like being digital. I have a daughter with very complex needs. I have nurses coming and going from my house to have a paper binder, a tangible binder. But if you have a kid that's higher functioning and only on a couple of meds and is maybe in a regular classroom and you don't have all those needs, maybe digital is a good solution for you because you really don't need to go into the amount of detail that I do. So it's very personal. You have to decide what works for you, but what we would like to do, is that my last slide? Yes. What we'd like to do, we do have some pages that we're going to pass out to you. The first section of the worksheet is for you to identify who is using your care binder. Maybe you need more than one. Maybe you need one for your partner's house who lives across town, and maybe you need one that you want to take to the doctor with you. So you're not limited to picking just one person. And then the second part of it is all of those sheets, like a medication schedule and well, you'll see on here. So we'd like you to go through and fill them out. If we're missing anything, we'd love to hear from you, like, hey, did you ever think of this? Or, I have a need to track my child's, seasonal allergy symptoms, something like that. So take a look at the worksheet, talk amongst yourself. I'd love to know how many of you guys already have a care binder that you work with and you're pretty happy with how it looks?
I have 2 kiddos with Dravet. They're 6 and 7, and I understand how overwhelming it is to keep track of everything. And so what I did was I have a binder with folders, and those are basically my dividers, and I color code them. Blue is this is, so then quickly I'm running, and I could leave it in the car or wherever I'm usually at. Typically we're driving or we're at appointments. So a place that's accessible, grab it and go, and it's labeled, and that way you're just taking the folder itself, not the whole binder if it's too tedious. So just the thought about that.
Yeah, that's a great idea. And there, I don't know about your guys' idea of a fun afternoon without your child, but I really like going into a Staples. There is a lot of cool stuff at Staples or Office Depot, and to go into the binder section, I kind of feel like I'm back in school and picking out the colors I like. So they have a lot of great structural things for this book that can really make it easy and convenient. You can color code it. You can bring your child with you. They can help you pick out colors. You can make it fun, but that's a great suggestion.
That's exactly what I used to do, was the folders. And I looked at my binder as the big binder was if something happens to me and suddenly someone else needs to step in, this is everything. But then, you could pull out the sections you needed, and I never had to I didn't want to be the binder mom that the doctor was like, oh no, I can't read through this. So I always did the folders too.
I mean, what's really nice is that, especially over COVID, a lot of hospitals stepped up their portal game. So, portals were not in use when Morgan was an infant. But now, I don't need to carry around my lab results because I can log into LabCorp from my phone, or, they're already in my chart if I happen to be going to the place with a MyChart. So that's really helpful as well. All of those systems, or all of those portals that are done by hospitals and groups like that, those are HIPAA compliant and very safe to use, so you don't have to worry about, data sharing or things like that. Sorry. I'd be happy to. If you want a copy of anything that you saw, like my personal templates, I will blank them out. I'm happy to send them to you. If you would do me a favor and email me with the request, kate@dravetfoundation.org. I'll be home on Monday, and I'm happy to share, whatever you'd like.
And I think another thing we were planning to try to do is that once all these videos are posted from the conference for the workshops, we'll link any of the worksheets. We can link the PowerPoints, or if there's other materials to share, and we'll reshare it that way too. So a couple of different ways we can share it.
Yeah, and if this exercise isn't helpful to you in terms of filling out what you need, do look at the third page. On the third page, I put a list of links of some online templates that I thought would be helpful for people like us. So the American Academy of Pediatrics I forgot which department their charting system goes through. If you go to the link I wrote on that page, you can click into a section. So, for example, emergency contacts. It will download a folder full of different templates directly onto your computer that you can fill out. So it looks like it's a list of a finite amount of things, but when you click into those links, it gives you a ton of options for different layouts. Cook's Children is on there. I think I put, I can't remember all of the other ones, but take those home with you, and you can look at it later if you find that's something helpful. Yeah. Oh, care binders on Etsy. So are they like formatted pages, or they're like a physical binder? Oh, PDFs. Okay. Oh gosh, I never thought of Etsy, but of course they have care binder templates. Yes. That's great. That's a great idea, and I'm sure they're very cute and very nice looking. Great. Does anyone else have any questions? We can give everyone a little bit of time if you want to look at that sheet and talk about it. We're supposed to go through, I don't know what time we're supposed to go through. I don't have my schedule.
So we have a break at about 2:20, so like in about 5 more minutes. So if you want to hang out, look at the worksheets. If anyone else has more ideas or tips or something you do different that you want to share, we can do that too.
Do you guys see anything that's missing? Like, is there something that you guys track or log at home that's not on the sheet or that we didn't talk about? Yeah. Oh.
I have been traveling around the world, so it's very important to keep different names for the medication, because some of the names are very US centric. So if you ever travel to Europe or Asia, you need to have other names available on the chart as well.
That's a good point.
And also like milligram and
That's right. Yep. Yep, I know the Cook's Children's, they have a vaccination template, like something similar to like when you have a newborn, you chart the vaccination schedule.
I have a question pertaining to something you mentioned about your child, if you're okay in sharing about the ulcerative colitis.
Sure.
I noticed that my daughter, at the time she was 4, having a lot of stomach pain. I immediately noticed like the right upper quadrant pain, the stomach, went to the doctor, and I requested, listen, I need testing for the stomach, and I would take pictures of how she would throw up undigested food. And do you think that that's from a specific medication? Because till this day, everything was negative. Barium small was negative, EGD was negative, everything was negative, and it's like, well, what is it? Like, and how do you manage that if you have any experience in that?
Yep. So, well, I can tell you my experience. Again, I'm not giving you medical advice, and
Right.
I can't prove this. We switched my daughter onto formula. At some point, I was trying to breastfeed her through the seizures, which didn't last too long. We switched her onto formula that did not agree with her. So we transitioned through a lot of formulas. In addition to the formulas we were trying, she was like constantly on antibiotics. In retrospect, if things would have been perfect, I feel like I would have liked to use less antibiotic. At the time, if I thought she had an ear infection or we thought she might be developing a UTI, I mean, we used a lot of antibiotics. Okay. So I know the combination of those two things are not great on the gut. I mean, that's true for adults too. Bad diet and constant antibiotic use can give us all digestive problems. I don't think it's specific to Dravet or epilepsy, and I don't think it was related specifically to any of the epilepsy, the seizure medications. I can tell you when they talk about communicating with doctors and getting doctors to listen, I mean, it was the first time that I actually screamed into my phone at a physician because I was so frustrated with Morgan crying 24/7, her telling me that she had a virus and she would just have to wait to get over it. At the time I was wanting her to have a colonoscopy, and they wouldn't schedule one even though she was bleeding into her diaper. It was bad, and I remember screaming at that physician over the phone, and I did get a colonoscopy scheduled for the following week. Maybe not the best example to give in this format, but that's a little bit about her digestive problems. So I actually, after we treated the colitis, I switched her over to real food, so she didn't get any more formula after that, and we really pumped up like probiotics and things like that, and that really healed her gut. We did specific carbohydrate diet with her, and now she, I blend her food for the G-tube, but we did step away from formula.
Very good. Thank you for sharing, and great job at getting that colonoscopy. Good job, Mama.
Thanks. Great. Well, I appreciate all of your input. I hope this was helpful for you. Again, this is just meant like another tool for your toolbox and maybe to get a little bit inside perspective on how another parent gets organized. So if you want anything specific, shoot me an email. I'll get back to you as soon as I can. I hope the worksheets are helpful and there's something you can take home. And other than that, I think we're gonna break. Yep. Wonderful. Okay. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, I think we'll start back again at right at 2:40. All right, so I am going to talk a little bit about being seizure ready, which is going to include monitors, diaries, and building a seizure action plan. I've got a lovely panel up here, so I'm going to kind of do each section and then go over to the panel and let them share a little bit about what they've used under each of these categories. And then Jamie and Aaron should have worksheets. Did you guys already pass them out? Okay, so we have worksheets that are gonna sort of help you think through what to think about when you're considering a detection device. So I know we already heard from Jamie this morning about all the different types of devices, so I'm just gonna talk about what to think about if you're wanting to pick a device for your situation. And then the other worksheet is kind of gonna help you think through what you would need, what different topics to think about when you're building a seizure action plan. All right. So I just introed you to what I'm doing. All right. So when you're thinking about seizure detection devices, I think the very first thing you should think about is what are your goals and needs for a detection device? So what type of seizures do you want to monitor? And can the current devices actually detect that type of seizure? Are there other parameters besides just, motor seizures that you want to detect? Things like heart rate or oxygen. What's most important to your family and to your needs for your child? The next thing is, where do you need to use the device? So is this just something you want to use during sleep? Is this something you want them to be able to be monitored on in other situations? Is it okay if it's stationary? Or do you need it to move? Is there a second caregiver, a second house they need to go to where you need that to be? Is that device going to be movable, or do you need to have a second one for there? Do you want it to be wearable or not? And then how do you need to be alerted? So do you just want a physical alarm that you're going to hear? Do you want it to send an alert to a device? Or do you want it to be like some of the devices or some of the systems have like a telecare service that will then call your phone? And then how many people do you need it to alert? Just someone who's there in the vicinity? Again, do you want it to come to your device and a second caregiver, or are there different caregivers that would need to come to at different times? All of those things can sort of impact the type of device that's going to work for you. And then thinking through that just a lot of these are going to have different levels of complex technology, and how comfortable are you with navigating that technology? Are you going to be okay to do the different updates that it might require? Not just updating like the application with new software, but some of these devices might use an iPad or a phone to send the alert to, and are you going to be able to buy a new device when that one needs to be updated? does the device that you're considering have good tech support if maybe you're not as comfortable with the technology or if it's a more complicated device? And then I know Jamie already talked about this morning, but ways to get the devices. So could this be covered by insurance? Is this something that you'd be able to seek a grant for? Or are these costs all gonna be just coming straight out of pocket? And what's gonna work best for you and your family? And so now I'm gonna go over to our panel and just hear about what devices that they've used and what's worked or hasn't worked for them. So on the panel, we have Jenny Gallo, Morgan Turpin, Jennifer Marasco, and Shannon Cloud. Jenny, do you want to start off?
Seizure device, seizure device. I use just a regular old baby monitor for my situation. A video monitor, and it has sound and movement detection, but it doesn't have anything in her bed. So it just detects motion in the room. So I just adjust the camera as wide as I can kind of on her bed. I also find it useful that if she's sleeping, I'm not sleeping, I'm sorry, like, you know, during the day, if she's in her room playing, I feel a little bit safe because I have access to access it on my phone, so I could pull it up at any time if I wanted to. You know, I could check her now, which she's not there, but I could look at her room now. Or it has an actual monitor, which was important for me because when she's in bed, I'm on my phone on Facebook and doing everything else, and I wanted a separate device so that while my phone is charging, I have something else going on. It really is annoying carrying two different things, but for the amount of time that I'm using it, I don't care. And it's next to my head while I lay in bed because I don't co-sleep with my child, and it just makes a little noise when she moves, and I half awake look at it, and I make sure, you know, that she's breathing normally and there's no seizure. And then I go back to bed. And that's what's worked for me for many years.
We use a Sami motion detection camera. Our son does co-sleep with us, so we use it for the beginning of the night when he's in bed and we haven't gone to bed yet. You cannot access it unless you're within the vicinity. So at home, we have a router for the Sami, and then the camera is on that router, and then we have an iPod device that has the app. You can add the app to any Apple device, but we have like a dedicated one that we use for that purpose. It records any motion, so even if the motion falls below the sensitivity settings to not set off the alarm, I can go back and watch the recordings to see if it was a small seizure or if he was just moving around. And then if it's above the sensitivity threshold, it will alarm, it will flash and make a sound, and it also locks the alarmed recordings so that you can also have those saved for you and they won't get, you know, deleted by storage or anything like that. We've been using it for years and years. He has nocturnal seizures, so even though we don't use the alarm feature at night because he sleeps in the same room with us, I do use the recording feature. Every day I go in and watch the recordings from the night before and I mark them, and that's how I record the seizures that he had the night before, and I can get, you know, the exact time and duration and all of that stuff by watching the recording. We've tried a wearable device in the past, actually as part of a trial. He has autism and sensory issues, and he hated it, and he would get it off and hide it, and we couldn't find it, so that was not ideal for him. He also hates the pulse ox, so it's kind of the same situation. He won't wear it to save his life. No pun intended, yeah. And we also used the Mfit Monitor when he was younger, when he slept in his own room. We use that as a dual detection between the Sami and the Mfit. The Mfit's a mattress monitor that goes underneath his mattress and detects like actual shaking motion. The alarm is kind of jarring on that one, and you can't, at least when we had it, you couldn't change it. But what we found was that it happened in both situations. Sometimes the Mfit picked up a seizure that the Sami missed, and vice versa. So when he slept alone, he had so many seizures at night that we like to have the two options.
I just need to ask you one question.
Yeah.
You said that you have a separate phone for, so do you have like a plan for that phone, or are you just using like the you know what I mean? Like,
It's actually an iPod, which I don't know if they still make them, but yeah.
they do. Because I always wonder, like I thought about getting it, but I was like, well, I don't want to pay for another phone to have to use it, and I have an old one, but like I don't want to pay for like a subscription, so you can actually use an iPod.
Yes, it just connects to the Wi-Fi that your camera is connected to. So we use the iPod, but also like I have a backup cell phone too. So the same thing, I don't have to carry service on it, but I can have the app on the Sami and it'll connect. And one thing I wanted to mention too is we travel with it. So we bring the router for the Sami with us, and we bring the iPod too, just because it's easier. And we just plug in the router. It doesn't matter where you are, and it just has its own internet, so you don't have to connect to like the hotel or the house Wi-Fi or wherever you're staying. You just plug it in, and then the camera connects to that, and it's just good to go, because we like to have it the same.
And you pay for the router though.
We bought the router, but you don't have to pay for like service. I'm not a technology person, so I don't know how it works, but somehow.
Do you have to have that router, or can you use
No.
it at your home? It's just
You don't,
you
yeah.
find that it was better.
Yeah, we used the Sami. No worries, these are good questions. We used the Sami without the Sami router for many years on our home Wi-Fi. The one thing we did find is that if your personal router is not very good, we would have instances where the camera would drop out. So we switched to a mesh network, which is like better coverage for the Wi-Fi in our house. And then that got rid of all the Sami issues. And then we switched to the Sami router because I didn't realize that that was a thing, and it makes traveling with it so much easier.
This is why I use a baby monitor, because I couldn't figure this out.
Yeah.
We bought just the camera. We didn't buy the kit. So if you buy the kit, it comes with everything. Yeah, we pieced it. But you can buy the router separately if you bought the camera by itself. You can also buy the router by itself. Yeah.
Question, if anyone knows. They stopped making iPods, and that's like what we exclusively lose. Does anybody know what they're gonna do?
Or an iPad. I think as long as I think you can still connect to Wi-Fi. You just don't have a network. So as long
Yeah,
as
you
have
can download-
Wi-Fi, it kind of acts like an iPod. I'm not a super tech person either. I could be wrong. Definitely an iPad, I know you can. I think an iPhone works the same way. 95% sure.
Yeah, I think the app is compatible with any Apple device. So if it's a phone or an iPad or an iPod, anything you have, it should work.
Antiquated tech. It changes faster than we can catch up. So I have a 2-year-old right now, and we were diagnosed at 9 months, and it was a whirlwind. And when we were discharged from the PICU with the diagnosis and everything, a friend of mine gave me the Owlet. So we had used that for a few days, but we found our daughter is an alligator, and she rolls and rolls and rolls in her sleep. And it's not seizure related, she just is very active. And it would trigger all the time. And I don't know if any of you have had an alarm go off in the middle of the night. It just like hits you in your core, and it's very hard to recover from that. So we stopped using the Owlet, and we were in the process of working to get the pulse ox, the Maximo, through our insurance. And we were very successful in less than 2 months to get that approved. And so we were using that, and it was working well. However, it did burn our daughter a few times on her toe, and then she actually, it wrapped around her neck a few different times, and that made me very anxious. If she wasn't going to have issues from seizure, would she pass away because she, hung herself? So for that stage of our life, we decided not to use it nightly. So we did have a regular baby monitor that was just in our house. But when we discovered she had this, we bought one of the ones that connects to our phone. So if we weren't there, we could see it. And we did not have that with our first child. This one was definitely something we wanted to take with us. So that's what she's been using primarily. We do like having the pulse ox. If she has illness, we can monitor her closer. And if she has a seizure, we can monitor her oxygen. And it has kept us from going to the hospital, which is amazing. But in hearing everyone's talks, we're actually looking into the Sami and Mfit, and we're looking to apply for the grants to get those coverage. So right now with a 2-year-old, we don't want anything that's wearable. So I think the different monitor devices that you talked about are helpful.
All right, so my daughter's 17, so obviously when we started this journey, we didn't have all these cool seizure detection things. So kind of like Jenny, we went old school. We had the baby monitor, and we still use it to this day. Mainly, her seizures are usually after she falls asleep, like 30 minutes or so, so we're usually not in bed yet. So just having that baby monitor is great because we will usually hear it, and I can take a peek and see, okay, she's having a seizure, and then once she's had one, we know, okay, be more, and so we'll be like, all right, she just earned a trip to our bed for the night, and she gets to come sleep with us the rest of the night. We do also have an Arlo camera, almost security camera that we put. There's one in her room, and so it does motion detection, and that way I keep my phone on vibrate so it won't wake me up when it alerts, but at least in the morning I can go back, kind of like Morgan said, and go back and look and see, okay, did she have one last night? And it's very rare that she has one that we don't wake up for, but it's good to have that. We did have an Embrace watch for a while as a part of the Stoke Butterfly trial, and it did not catch a single one of her seizures, or at least we did not see it in the app, and we're not sure if it's because the trial prevented us from seeing it because they were tracking it or not. We could see her sleep, it recorded her sleep, but so we did not have a whole lot of faith in that based on that, and so we quit wearing it.
All right, great. Does anyone, I think we can kind of take questions if anyone has questions for the panelists right now. If not, we're going to move forward to talk about seizure diaries. So I think this sort of just is echoing a bit of what Kate already talked about in her talk, is just like tracking a lot of things in a binder, or in this case, we're talking about just seizures, but this might even be part of your bigger binder for tracking. And this really can look different for every family depending on what level of data you want. I think at least some basic tracking, like Kate was saying, so that it is really easy to go back and look when you've made medication changes, as your child's aged, how things are changing. I think when your kid's really young, it's so easy to really easily just remember because the history is short. But as they get older, if you can kind of have these quick things to look back and see how things have changed, it can be really helpful. And so again, I think Kate already talked about a lot of this. So, marking down the seizure type, the frequency, the length of the seizure, if you noticed a particular trigger, what you did, if you had to do any sort of intervention for that seizure, what the recovery looked like, and any other related details that might help you inform future decisions about care and treatment. So some other just ideas of things you might want to include would be, the time of day that it happened, or even the time of month, particularly relevant for females hitting adolescence and beyond. Definitely, if you've made a recent medication change, note that in the log. Were there differences in sleep quality? And then any other details that you noticed about the seizure, particularly if it was something out of the norm. And don't forget, videos can also be helpful. And some of the seizure tracking apps even have the ability, I believe, to record in the app the seizure, which can be really helpful. Some of the things just to think about when you're considering what you want the diary to look like for you is the ease of use, and that's such a personal decision whether you want something digital, something paper, maybe something hybrid. Maybe you like the digital because it's on your phone, but you want to write something down to have sort of like a longer log that you can visually see in one place. And then how shareable do you need it to be? Do other caregivers need to be logging seizures at the same time? Is it something you want to be passing back and forth, or do you want to be able to log into the same app to seamlessly track the device? And then do you want to be able to share this log with nurses or doctors, or even a summary? One of the most commonly used electronic diaries is Seizure Tracker, and this was developed by a dad of a child with I think it's LGS, but it's another severe form of epilepsy. And not only did he develop it based on what he knew from experience, but Seizure Tracker listens to the users regularly and gets feedback, and they're constantly improving what they already have to make sure they're meeting the needs of everyone who's using it. There are definitely other apps to use. The Epilepsy Foundation has good resources both for paper diaries as well as some other apps. I think one of them is called Niles. It's just not as tailored to the DEEs or something like Dravet as Seizure Tracker is, so that's why I've put that one up here. But it's going to be just a personal decision of what fits best for you. That is my really brief thing on seizure diaries, because I want to hear from the panel. My experience is super limited. For my son, we had nursing care, and so we were keeping most of the seizure tracking stuff through their logs. And so I just don't have as much personal experience with this, so I'm excited to hear from you guys about what's worked for you.
So because Lena is 15, they didn't have all these cool things, or at least I didn't know about them. And she was so small when it started as well, 8.5 months old, as many of ours are. I kind of, in the beginning, didn't know what to do, so I literally, because it was happening all the time, and the most ones that I was trying to track, the ones that were happening all the time, was her absons. So I literally would just have a notebook down, and I started with the old tick marks on the notebook. And that was becoming annoying because, as you know, babies start to crawl and they move around, and now my notebook's over there, and now she dropped and she's having a seizure, and now I'm trying to jot down the start time and the end time, and then I'm trying to jot down notes like her eyes deviating to the left or to the right, and it started in her right foot, and all these little things, because this way I'm jotting down things so that I can write longer after everything's done. So then I decided to get creative, and I said, what else can I do to capture all these absons so that I'm not having to walk around with a bucket full of all of this stuff, like her medicine and all of this stuff. So I got myself, I love my zip-up hoodies. So I had a zip-up hoodie because it's always cold in my house, and I got myself a clicker, like a baseball, umpire, and I put that in my pocket, and I would walk around and I would just click all day. And then I would periodically look at it and then, jot down the number and then reset it just so that I knew that I wasn't messing it up. And then that would be how I would tally her absons all day, because it was too much on the paper. And then when, her big ones and stuff, I would write them down. I have to say, Kate's suggestion of the Excel. I'm really good in Excel. I don't know why it never occurred to me, because you could easily turn that into a graph and everything else and look at what happens over time and everything that she's telling us to do. Hello, mind blown this morning, the simplest things. And Seizure Tracker, I believe, is one of those things that can also do that. And I do have to raise my hand and say I have not used it yet. I'm in the process of taking everything that I took from, once I got to my current doctor, which has been a 15-year journey of getting to that one. He had these little paper, monthly things, so I started using them, and it was seizure type A with a number, and B and C, and I did that, and I had them all, filed somewhere. So I've been taking them, and I've actually been slowly but surely putting them into Seizure Tracker, so I haven't seen the actual result of it, but I'm excited to, but I don't know, maybe I'll do Kate's too, and see which one I like better.
You're gonna like what I have to say. So we do old school writing it down as the first step. We buy, I'm not saying I recommend this, but this is what we do. We have these planners, and he has a lot of seizures every day, so I need the ones that are daily broken out. And like I said, I review the Sami recordings from the night before, and I write down the seizures and the types and the time that it occurred and the duration, whatever, if I gave rescue or whatever other information. And then also my husband will write down little notes about he's on an antibiotic or, bowel movements, like stuff like that. We write it all in there. And then a while ago, I was asked to do something, and so I decided to take my little planners and put them into Excel. It was really fun, actually, and I broke it out. That sounds nerdy, but whatever, it's true. I broke it out by, time period, and I plotted it all, and then you put it on a graph, and it was really cool to see kind of the evolution over time of his seizures. So that's the data that we like to look at. We're looking for trends to see if the changes that we've made are being impactful. I've tried a couple apps in the past. To me, I don't know. I found most of the ones I tried kind of cumbersome. It was either too much information or not enough information. There was nothing that I felt like was perfect for us, but being in the FEN trial is when I started really doing my little diaries. So that's what we still do. It works.
I also love Excel, and I loved Kate's presentation, and I just was touched by the Staples talk. So Cora's different in terms of we just mainly have the tonic-clonics at this point, and when we first had our journey, I didn't know what to do, and I could just rattle off, everything. When we had another seizure, I could say the day, the time, what it looked like, and then it all started to blur, and I couldn't. So I started writing everything down, and Google Docs, it's very helpful. I did try Seizure Tracker, and I don't know if I just wasn't in a place to want to use something that wasn't intuitive to what I needed. I needed to have that control of Google Docs where I could add another column, I could color coordinate it per what I needed, because my life had no control at that point, and I needed to see this thing that I created, and it was kind of like a security blanket for me, and I can carry it in my phone at any time and pull it up at any time. So I didn't like paper copies of anything. I liked it on my phone, and so that's what I'm still using. I count how many there are. It's usually the date and time, what it looked like, what body parts were involved, if she had eaten before, if there were any behaviors that we noticed, how she was afterwards, if we went to the hospital, what they treated her with at the hospital, what the discharge instructions were. And then I got really quirky about it. I started tracking full moon cycles. Because there's so many random anecdotal things that aren't scientifically studied, but people swear by them. So I don't know, it was just my need to think of a bigger picture, but I just started doing that. And then also she was on keto, and then she went to the modified Atkins, and I found that having that all in the same tabs was also helpful for me, and having the control on different columns were really beneficial. And then Sarah? I'll show you. I don't have my phone with me. I left it at the table, but we can look at it. Off the top of my head, not really right this second. But it's just interesting to see a time period of it all. But we can look at it together. But now we also in the MAD part of it all, the modified Atkins diet, I do the bowel movements. I look at if she had certain therapies that day, because maybe that was exhausting and correlated with seizure activity, and mood, and obviously medications as well. So that's different things, and I just like the control of it all. That might change later if she develops more of the absence and the myoclonus, where it's multiple a day, but right now it's mainly tonic-clonic spread out, and that's controllable for me at this point.
So I started with a Word document back in the beginning when we were having seizures and every seizure required a trip to the ER. And so I would kind of just document, like, this is the date, this is the time, this is how long it lasted, and the notes about, what the doctor saw, what medications changes we made or whatever. So I kind of had that history. And even though I've started using Seizure Tracker probably 10 years ago, and that's nice because it does at least allow you some basic reports that it will kind of shoot out, and you can kind of see a graph with the medications in conjunction with the seizures. And it's not super sophisticated or fancy, but it's still kind of helpful to have that. I liked having an electronic record of it. But the thing I'll say is I found helpful, I still use the Word document, and it's literally, I just put the date and the time and if there was anything to note. And that was helpful when participating in clinical trials because they would want like the full-blown history. And that way I literally could just give them that document and it would have, when we made med changes and different stuff like that, because they would want that. And it saved me a lot of time having to like sit there and tell them everything when I'm here, I printed this out for you, you can get it. And then the only other thing, I just started doing this a few years ago, which is kind of antiquated, old school. At the beginning of the year, I print out a calendar with the 12 months of the year, and like one page has 2 months on it. So it'll be like January and February, just a very basic calendar. And I just take the red Sharpie on a day that she had a seizure, and I'll put PM if it happened after going to sleep, AM if it was early in the morning, or nap, since they're all during sleep, and then how many. And that's actually what I take to our neurology appointments, because like Seizure Tracker or the Word document, it doesn't like clearly lay it out. But if we see him every 3 months, I can open that binder and just be like, look here, she had a bunch here. She went a week without any here, but we don't know why. And then I also will write on it, like when we make med change. That honestly, to me, has been the thing most helpful for me, really, to get a grasp of what are we doing right, what maybe isn't working, because I can see it spelled out on that piece of paper.
That's great. All right, do you have?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up about the clinical trials. CORE's in the Envision Natural History study, and they want to know everything. Like if she gets a Tylenol, if she gets clonazepam, like anything that deviates off of her norm. And that's a lot to like think about, because I'm not emailing the coordinator every day that it happens. So in my Excel document, that's what I put that, and then I just copy and paste it, send it to them, a week or bi-weekly. But that's very helpful if you're going to be in a study, because they want everything imaginable. And when you're just dealing with this life, it's very hard to keep track of all of that.
Great. Thank you guys so much for sharing. Does anybody else have a question or a way they do it differently that they want to share? I know there are a few families in the community that I feel like go even a step further and basically doing almost the level of Excel, but beyond that, and they're able to like chart in kind of everything and just try to see trends, and they make every medication decision based on that. And that's not for every family. They're spending a lot of time collecting all those details, but for some families it's been really important, and it's made them feel a lot more confident in making the decisions. And so it's really finding what works for you, but I think we've heard really good options today. All right, so now the last part of this, I'm just going to talk a little bit about seizure action plans. And so definitely everyone who has epilepsy should have a seizure action plan, but certainly everyone with Dravet syndrome should have one. So many of you, if you don't have it written out, I know you have a seizure action plan in your head. You've probably talked it through with your neurologist. You know what to do. But it is really important to have it written down so that it's easy to share with someone else. So this should include tailored guidelines on how to respond during your seizure, specific health and medical information about your child, and then information to help someone else who might be helping to care for your child recognize the seizure and what the appropriate steps are for intervention for your child. What is really important is that it's been shown that the faster you can respond to a seizure, there's a reduced risk of prolonged seizures. This is just in epilepsy in general. And that also means a reduced risk of mortality and a reduced risk for additional rescue medications. So swift intervention is important. I think I'm talking to a room of people that already know that. You know how to interact or intervene quickly. You have probably all been in numerous emergency situations, and at this point, you're probably pretty good at staying cool under pressure. But don't forget that if you are sending your child to school, if you're asking for respite care, those people may not be as confident as you in an acute emergency. And so having something very simple, very straightforward that can help them know what to look for and know what to do can be really helpful. Just want to mention, we've got this worksheet that we've handed out to help you think through all the things that should go in your seizure action plan, and you should be an active participant in this, but it should always be developed with your neurologist, and they should always sign off on it at the end. Like I said, focus on being really clear and concise. People may need to read this during an emergency. A seizure action plan will have a lot of additional information besides just the acute, what to do in an acute emergency. So it's going to have maybe your child's weight, age, the other medications they're on, other information. But think about having a seizure emergency plan as the very first page of the action plan. Something very simple for them to look at and to know what to do during an emergency. So I'm going to show you an example of kind of that seizure emergency plan, or sometimes it's called an acute seizure action plan. But this you can think of as sort of that first page, and then the entire seizure action plan can have more information. You want to review this regularly, at least once a year, but certainly remember to update it when you make medication changes so that it stays accurate. And really think through about who are the people that you need to share this with. Is it going to be a babysitter or a respite carer, a grandparent or a friend? Is it going to be a daycare or a school that your child's going to, or a day program? But then also think about emergency response personnel. They need to know which medications are going to be most appropriate when you call them after maybe you've already given an at-home rescue med. What's the next step? And your neurologist can write really clear, detailed information about here's what works best for this patient, or if you don't know what works best, here's at least what we recommend in general you should try first, second, third, once you're in an emergency medical facility or in the ambulance. So here's just an example. So Tracy Dixon Salazar worked with the Epilepsy Alliance to help develop this, and she was nice enough to share it with us. So Tracy's the executive director for the LGS Foundation. And I like this one because it has the cartoons. And so I think for parents here, this is silly. You guys know these cartoons, you don't need this. But think about the people who do need this that you're going to share it with. So this is sort of the idea of what you would have on that first page. Very simple information, pictures to help work through it, and steps of what to look for. What does a seizure look like in my child? What sort of rescue medication should they be given, and at what point during the seizure emergency should you do that? This has nice little pictures that sort of show the route of administration to help people know where the medication is going to be applied. And then reminds them, time it, and when you might need to do more. When do you need to call for emergency response personnel? And then what to look for after the seizure. If they had to administer rescue meds, what do they need to be watching for in the recovery? So yeah, be sure to share it once you develop it. Share it with anyone who might be around when your child's going to have a seizure emergency, and share it, early, so that you have time to talk about it with them if they have questions and they have time to process it. And then before we go to the panel, I just wanted to put in a quick reminder when we're talking about seizure action plans that, of course, this brings up seizure rescue meds. And I just wanted to talk about, there's several different types, and they have lots of different routes of administration. And we've even heard this weekend about, additional routes of administration that are being investigated in clinical trials right now. So staccato alprazolam, that's in clinical trials right now, that might be a new seizure rescue med eventually. But Diastat, I think, is the oldest and most common one, but it's administered rectally. And so while that may be appropriate for young children, as your kid gets older, you might want to think about, is this still the right route of administration? And ultimately, the first thing is always going to be what works the best. And so maybe it's not the preferred route of administration, but this is just what works the absolute best for your child, and that's okay too. But we have nasal administration routes now that I think are so simple, and it's nice that we have these options now. So Valtoco, which is diazepam, the same medication that's in Diastat, but it's administered nasally, and then Nasalam, which is a formulation of midazolam. There's also medications like lorazepam that can be administered buccally, and then talk with your neurologist, because I know families use other medications that I haven't listed here, but I just wanted to hit some of the main ones and make sure everyone's aware that there are multiple options available, and you can really talk about what's going to work best for your family. All right, so Jenny, I know I'd love to hear from Jenny, because she shared her seizure action plan with me beforehand, and I know you have the seizure action plan, but then you actually had a letter from your neurologist that sort of put things into context. So can you share that a little bit?
So I have kind of like that page that Veronica shared with us, but I like that better, so I think I'm going to pull that and I'm going to make him switch to that. I have the one from the Epilepsy, I think it's from Epilepsy Foundation.
And this one is on, the Seizure Action Plan Coalition. So I put the logo up there, but I forgot to mention, we have links to lots of different types of options. So ones we're talking about, so it links out to the Epilepsy Foundation one. But this one that I just shared is on that website, and there's just tons of other information about building these on that website. So check that out, but that's where you can find it, Jenny.
And I think the one that I use, and you guys have probably all seen it too, and if not, are using it, I believe, if I remember correctly, that it has the steps of like what to do, which I had liked, but I like the cartoons on that because I feel like we're so used as a society to like just quickly look at things, and I always wonder in my head, like handing a piece of paper in an emergency, like, are they really going to take the time to read this? And obviously, sorry, it's time to get Lena off the bus. Or no, that was walking the dogs. So I like the pictures, so that was just, sorry. But so I have that, and it's all laid out, just like that. But it wasn't enough information, and I was having an issue with the school. And believe it or not, if you really want to be horrified and you want to feel good about yourself, or not feel alone because you just found out about seizure action plans this week, you're not alone, because my daughter is 15 and her first seizure action plan was just created, I think, 2 years ago. So when Lena started school, nobody told me about a seizure action plan. Her neurologist didn't tell me about a seizure action plan. I just had it up here. Pretty scary when you think about it, but it's how we lived our life. And the nurse at her school knew what she needed to do. We talked about it all the time. I've always offered to go into school and give any kind of advice, whatever. Any seizure that she had at school, they always called me. I would get there, I was there, and luckily nothing happened. And then that nurse, who happened to also be my nurse at school, so that's how long she was in the system, when she retired, we had a new nurse, and she was doing things by the rules, and she's like, you need to fill out this form, you need a seizure action plan. And I was like, oh, we have one. And I thought she had one. Like, we have one. I talked to her about it. Like, I've told you about her seizures. And she's like, no, I need you to fill out this form. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, crazy. So then I rushed to my doctor, and I'm like, I need you to fill out this form. Like, how come, nobody's ever told me about this? So it was like a total oversight. And so you are not alone. So we filled this out. We had been using that. And then I had an issue with the school because they were allowing Lena to walk around with her little bag of medicine and whatever. A whole nother thing that we don't have time to get into. And I had the doctor write a note because there is no room on that paper. And it was specifically written so that it was kind of like a cover our butts. So it basically specifies that page 1 is her seizure action plan, and this is what you need to do and follow these directions. Here's my information, here's how you contact me, but it is also, it goes into detail that it will be in her backpack, her medical backpack, which also has these items listed at all times. It has a copy of her seizure action plan. It has, everything in there, and that it also needs to be handed off from this person to the person who will be administering it, and it needs to be within 5 minutes of, spatial with her at all times, and all of this other stuff this little letter says, and it's literally just one page typed on his letterhead, but that has saved us. And because I also kind of fought with the school to get her out of district, it's just something that we found that has now made it easier for us to get a nurse to ride on the bus with her, that the district provides to get her from my town to her new town. So it's just kind of that step extra that has just kind of saved us to do that. I think that's all that that covers.
I think one thing that made me think of to mention is that you can go through developing this, but if your child's already in school, talk to the school first, because some schools have specific requirements and it can differ from district to district as to exactly what they need in that seizure action plan. So you might have one plan that sort of feels like what you feel best about sharing, but you might need to have a slightly, different version that goes to the school. And so just be prepared, check with your school and see what they need, and if you can develop it how you want, or if they have specific guidelines they need around it.
Yeah, that reminds me, I'm sorry. So that letter that I'm talking about was actually, if you really want to get heated, was because when I was fighting with the school and she left her medicine in the hallway and, anybody could get to it, I freaked out on them, as you would, and I'm like, well, what do you mean she's carrying it? She can't administer it, and now anybody could have, it's a class 1 drug, like anybody could have gotten it. It boggled my mind that they were just allowing this, and I couldn't understand it. And I said, but I don't understand, she has a seizure action plan. You made me get you a seizure action plan. Why would you think that it's okay for her to not, why isn't the medicine locked up? Why isn't it this? Why isn't it that? And I don't know why I don't have the answer, because it still is crazy to me that I had to say okay, but we had to put it in writing. And my lawyer was like, you need to put it in writing that you want them to do this. And even my doctor was like, you need to do what? But it was one of those things where it's put it in writing that this is what you want to do and that this is what needs to be done. And it's just kind of saved us that kind of transition, if you will.
So we have 2 versions. So we have more of the seizure emergency plan, and it's a little half-page paper. I like the one with the cartoons, but ours is bullet points, and there's bolded and highlighted parts to really draw your eyes to it. And our son's nurse was kind enough to get it laminated at school, and so we have a copy in his rescue bag. We have one in our kitchen at home. The school has one. We kind of have them all over, and it gives all the steps, and he has different seizure types. So one thing I wanted to point out is that we learned our lesson the hard way. When he first started preschool, and he didn't have a nurse with him, we had seizure action plan sort of thing filled out by his neurologist, but the rescue medication was very specific in how to administer it for convulsive seizures after X amount of time. And we did not account for him having a prolonged non-convulsive seizure because that wasn't something that he had. And sure enough, the second week of school, he had a 25-minute non-convulsive seizure, and the school was like, well, we can't administer meds because it's not outlined that way for us. Thankfully, I was right there, and they called me, and I was able to come, and they called 911 and et cetera. But I was able to give him rescue medication. But after that happened, we realized we really need to account for, even if he's not having these seizures very often, if he's had them before, we need to make sure that we cover all the types. We have his VNS magnet in there as well, when to swipe that and how to swipe it, when to give the different types of rescue, and also we account for clusters because that's his new seizure type. So it's not a single prolonged, but it's however many seizures within this time frame. So it's an evolution over time as his seizures evolve and as his rescues evolve, and it's something that we're continually updating. But yeah, they definitely do need, and I feel like we learned that the hard way too. They need everything explicitly spelled out. And our district uses a lot of like formalized paperwork, and our neurologist gets kind of annoyed because a lot of it is repetitive, and he'll write on there, see action plan, like because the action plan is where you should go because it has all the information. So it's a little bit cumbersome, I guess, to get it all done up front, but it is so important. And I wish, in hindsight, that situation that happened with him could have gone much worse. And we were just lucky that that I happened to be there and that I was able to give rescue. So that's my little 2 cents that I wanted to add.
Mine's similar to the two of them, so I'm not going to be repetitive, but some things I want to highlight. Our Seizure Action Plan is Cora's been on keto or modified Atkins, so there are specific things in there for a nurse or someone who'd be dealing with her, but also for the hospital, because in our experience, our hospital was our treating keto team. However, the keto doctors and the keto dietitian are not there 24/7. They're not there on holidays. They're not there on the weekends. And seizures happen whenever. So we've run into some issues that the treating team didn't know how to treat our daughter. So we have a protocol on there for what sort of medicines they can and can't give her, who they could contact, because sometimes that doesn't seem very apparent. So that is written in there specifically. So I found that's been helpful, as well as certain formulas that she's on and what you can do to make that formula, because that sometimes isn't very apparent also for the treating team. And then we also have in our seizure action plan things about precautions. So for Cora, a temperature of 99, like most of our children potentially, is worrisome. In a hospital, they would not treat a fever for a child normally. So we have that in there to drive that point in case they, it's not said out initially. And then we just also talk about like a cooling vest and the equipment that we have, like where all that is. So it's all laid out. So that's always been very helpful to have everything written down in plain view. But I also want to make a point to Veronica, make sure you update it. They're not helpful if they're not updated, and I know things get very chaotic, but it's very horrific. And I've had this experience where I went to grab something and I was like, oh my God, like 6 months went by and we hadn't updated it. So I put a reminder in my calendar to review it periodically, and we date every copy, because in our house we have multiple boxes of rescues around the house, and in each of those blue boxes are the seizure action plan, and I don't want to have outdated information, so everything is dated and updated periodically.
So we just have a very basic one-page Word document that I started when she was really young, mainly just like for when the grandparents were at our house or we had a babysitter or something, with just very basic, high-level that they would know who to call. It would have her doctor's information and the current medications and stuff, or that if they had to call 911, something they could hand to the EMTs so that they would know about her. And once she started school, we had to fill out the official school form, and our school district actually uses the Epilepsy Foundation Seizure Action Plan, and so our doctor signs it every year because they require it, but we really don't have that much information on there because we've had issues in elementary school with a nurse that was giving Diastat, even though I would be on the phone begging her, please do not give her Diastat. She's going to be fine. You don't need to do that. Now you have to call 911. And so I ended up taking that document that I had, and I would always, at the beginning of every school year, I would update it, and I put it in Elena's backpack, and most of her teachers probably don't even know it's there, but it was for me, if they ever had to call 911, I could say, there's a sheet of paper in her backpack, please get that out and give that to the EMTs, because it explains she has Dravet syndrome, she has seizures, she will not need to be transported to the hospital if the seizure has stopped, because that was the problem we had, is they're wanting to transport her, and we're like, no, it's okay, this is normal for her. And so to me, that was important, just to have something that explains what is normal for her, so that in that situation, hopefully the people wouldn't freak out, and then they would have the list of meds and stuff. But we fill out that form for school, but we actually don't have him write a rescue med on it, even though we have the prescription at home, because we don't keep it at school because we don't want them to give it. And the fire station is literally right around the corner, so I'd rather let them come if they need to.
Great. Thank you guys so much for sharing. So that sort of wraps up my talk. I did just want to recognize that I got a lot of this information from some of these great resources. So Epilepsy Foundation, they actually have great school trainings that they can link to, as well as some resources for building a seizure action plan, and they have links to some of the different options for seizure diaries. Epilepsy Action, which is epilepsy.org.uk, really, I used them a lot for sort of thinking through all the things related to considering different devices. The Danny Did Foundation is also such a great resource, not only for helping fund families to get different detection devices, but they have a great series called Dissecting Devices that goes over a lot of the different devices, has reps from the companies talking about them in depth. I did a deep dive last fall to try to learn about all these different devices, and it was a really great series, and I know they've added even more since then, so definitely visit their website. And the Seizure Action Plan Coalition is really the landing spot for all things Seizure Action Plan. That has that a link to that guide that I shared with the pictures. So if you want to see that, I believe it's tagged as ASAP because it's called the Acute Seizure Action Plan. And also on the Seizure Action Plan Coalition, we have links to some, I believe it was the Epilepsy Foundation that did some really great videos about administering rescue meds that nurses put together. So really check out all of these websites. I think they're fantastic resources. And if you have questions, if you're trying to find a resource that we mentioned today, if you have questions for panelists and you can't remember who said what, you can contact me and I'll help get you answers. If I don't know the answer, I will ask and get back to you. So the rest of the workshop, we have about 15 more minutes just to look over the worksheets we handed out. If you want to think through any of these things, if you have comments or want to share, we have about 15 minutes left for that. And thank you guys so much. Thank you. And thank you to our panel so much for all you shared. Thanks, guys.